Welcome to Ceci, the podcast where you see what others see.
Hi there. Good morning. So today, what are we talking about? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Ceci here. Is anyone there? Hi, my name is Ceci. I'm based in Berlin, and I want to welcome you to Ceci, the podcast where you see what others see. In this season, we're talking about movement. And today we'll talk about the Himalayas, Mount Everest, and how glaciers movement shape our planet.
Our guest today is Tenzing Chogyal Sherpa, born in Natche Bazar, a village located at the foot of the highest mountain in the world in Nepal. He's one of 8 grandchildren of Kanchha Sherpas, the last surviving member of Hillary and Tenzing's 1953 Everest expedition, the first men to stand at the peak of Mount Everest. Unlike his grandfather, Tenzing Chogyal is not a mountaineer, but a scientist, a glaciologist, whose research concentrates mostly in understanding the dynamics of glaciers in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region and their evolution with the changing climate and how these changes would impact people living in mountain regions, specifically in the context of glacial hazards. Author of various scientific articles in this field, Tenzing Chogyal studied environmental science in Kathmandu University, Dhulikhel, Nepal, where he earned a BSc degree and later an MS degree in glaciology. A vital member of the EverTrill Project, where the team had drilled more than 150 metres into the Khumbu Glacier, first of its kind at that elevation. Tenzing has extensive experience conducting glaciohydrological expeditions and geophysical surveys across Nepal and was one of the key researchers from the Glaciology team in the National Geographic and Rolex Everest expedition, which installed one of the highest automatic weather stations in the world. A research associate of the Cryosphere Monitoring Project at Kathmandu University until 2019, he's currently a remote sensing and geoformation associate with the International Centre for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD. Tenzing Chogyal collaborates with scientists worldwide and shares his learnings with Sherpas and other mountain communities about the impact of the changing climate in these icy landforms, whose effects, he says, spread far beyond those who live in the mountains. He also works towards including and encouraging more local people in scientific research in hope of bridging a consistent gap between scientists and local people in the mountains.
Good evening in Kathmandu, Tenzing. What a pleasure and how exciting to have you here today.
Good evening, Cecilia, and thank you very much for having me.
From watching photographs and reading about the Himalayas landscape, I was talking to myself the other day and thinking how beautiful the sun rising must be up there. The sunlight bathing the wonderfulness of the mountains, and how at night the sky probably looks like a wide ocean made from shining stars, a sort of magic bowl opening the cosmos for us to be discovered. Yet, I could still not avoid to also think about the harshness of the land and how this harshness has made daily life for Sherpas so difficult as to the extent to make survival their central focus. How was it for you, Tenzing, to have been born and to have grown at the feet of Mount Everest?
I guess you already said it quite nicely. Anyways, for the first phase of my life, I grew up in Namche Bazar, that is directly on the foothills of Mount Everest. Honestly, life at that time was very simple. very peaceful and very serene. I still have fond memories of my childhood, and I feel very fortunate enough to have been able to grow in the mountains and in the foothills. If I remember, like snow was one of the best things of my life when I was a child. I used to love snowball. I used to love playing in the snow a lot. I used to get beaten by my mom a lot because I used to be in the snow a lot. And then also at the same time, I grew up watching those mountains. I grew up watching all of the sunset and the sunrise that you've been talking about. And to be honest, it was so much simpler, and I feel so much luckier to have been able to experience that, because now once I've come to the city life, life here is much more hectic. Life here is much more busy. There's so many things going around. But when you're in the mountains, like everything becomes insignificant. And then I still have those fond memories. So I just like to say that um, growing at the feet of Mount Everest was one of the best experiences of my life.
Tenzing, your grandson of Kanchha Sherpa, a then 19-year-old boy from Namche Bazaar, and who made history helping Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay to complete the first successful ascent of Everest expedition back in 1953. Mount Everest has probably given him a lot and has taken from him perhaps much more. What Sherpas do is a huge sacrifice in the aims of making a living to survive. 1/3 of the deaths of Everest are Sherpas, as they need to go up and down repeatedly during the same ascent. The load of carrying heavy weight on their backs and the opening of routes for Western climbers to reach the peak, the feeding, the cleaning of corpses, and so on, the physical toll is evident. But what about the spiritual part of it? How difficult do you think is for a mountaineer Sherpa to have leave pending between worlds? In one side, being aware of the sanctity, and then on the other side, having to deal with the reality of trying the best they can to make a living by ascending this sanctuary in a surviving attempt to support their families?
Yeah. Anyways, regarding my grandpa, yeah, you are right. He did lose many of his friends, many of his colleagues, and many of his family during the expeditions to Everest. But what we need to understand is where we come from, the Everest region. Albeit it has its own charm, it lies in the foot of Mount Everest and everything, but at the same time, it's not the most ideal place to live. It's one of the most inhospitable areas. Like there's nothing that grows up there. That's why most of our people, they were either farmers, and even for farming, you just had potatoes or only like few crops. And then the other option was trading, going to Tibet and then trading, like some going from Nepal and going to Tibet. But that's all in itself a very difficult and a very dangerous job. So then came the first ascent of Mount Everest in 1953 with Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. At that time, like you said, many Sherpas were reluctant to go up to the top, because for us, mountains and lakes, rivers, all have meanings. Like we have a very spiritual connection with these landforms, and we believe that a local deity or a god or goddesses reside on this in these mountains. I think there was some sort of rumor or belief in the people that if you get to the top of Everest, or if you climb on top of Everest, it's like stepping on a god or a goddess, and then that might bring upon the wrath of the god, or you might even have your life being shortened. So that there was still that fear among the Sherpas. But on the other side, there is this economic opportunity. There is this opportunity of employment. Because at that time, employment was something very, very difficult. Like my grandpa walked more than a month from Nepal to Darjeeling. The Darjeeling is all the way up in India, just to get a job. And that's where he found a job with Tenzing Norgay Sherpa, and he stayed in their house, and that's where he got the job of the Everest Summit. But just looking at that, like there's there's the thing about economic opportunity, but at the same time there is your spiritual and your spiritual belief as well. But I guess you sort of outweigh these things. But to be honest, in to look at the facts, none of the Sherpas there went up to the summit. It was only Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. They only were there to assist the expedition, and it was quite a good employment opportunity. So that is why they were at the end they were quite they agreed to go to the expedition, and I guess even till today, the Sherpa people still have a very deep respect for the mountains. And if in the modern expedition, even if you see, there is still a puja ceremony. There's still a ceremony to sort of get permission from the god or goddesses before climbing on Everest. So that is where the belief is there. But at the same time, people still climb. So you always find a consensus between that, and that's what people have been doing in a way, trying to sort of make it more respectful for the god as well.
Tenzing, like these friendships that are born in the mountains, because for sure Sherpas have made a deep impression on Western climbers' life. And I'm talking about a lot of professional climbers, whose interviews I've heard. Sherpas have changed their lives because, of course, they have experienced life and death together up there in the mountain. Have you heard from your grandfather or any mountaineer about these relationships, these bonds they've made?
Oh yeah, I have heard a lot about it, and of course, going up to those extreme places, staying for more than 2 3 months, you develop this deep sense of camaraderie. You develop a very good friendship because you go through the hardship, you go through the challenges, you go through the risk every day together. Because once you cross base camp, at the end of the day, both either you're a Sherpa, either you're a Westerner, either you're from anywhere, you are sharing the same route, you are sharing the same ropes, and you are sharing the same risk. And of course, there's this deep sense of bonding between the Sherpas and the people that they help get up to the mountains. And this has had a lot of influence to the to the Sherpas themselves. This has made them more welcoming to the Westerners, welcoming to the outside world. This has influenced their way of thinking. And at the same time, this could be the same for the Western people as well. They get to they get to be more introduced to the Sherpa way of life. They get to understand how Sherpas think and why they have been very resilient and very adaptive to those environments. And I think this is a win-win scenario for both. Of course, there are both sides of the coin that there are some like not very good experiences, but that's the case of any relationship, and that's how any two communities can learn from each other.
Yeah, so there's evident this change that has been going through the last years, and in general, since the first expedition that reached the top of the Everest. Um, and I wanted to talk about this change in the sense of wonder in the side of the Westerns, the sense of wonder and the sense of adventure and exploration of new worlds that inspired characters like Sir Edmund Hillary and Alexander von Humboldt have been exchanged for achievements. Each ascent turned into a symbolic medal. And all of this said, of course, as I was mentioning, by professionals mountaineers themselves. Do you think, Tenzing, that Sherpas ever understood the sense of adventure that the first climbers had and some of the contemporary still have today?
Yeah, of course, there's this allure of Mount Everest and the allure of mountaineering with the people from all over the world. The Sherpas themselves, like you said, we have this deep respect. We have this spiritual connection. We have always seen these mountains. Uh, while we may have different perspectives on mountaineering, uh, primarily on personal adventure, but at the same time, we have to understand that it is our way of living. Most of the expeditions, most of mountaineering that Sherpa people were originally introduced to is due to the financial situations. There might have been this sense of adventure and risk taking, of course, in a personal opinion. But once you go to the same place twice in a year, thrice a year, I don't think that gets, it might get adventurous, but might not be as enjoyable as the first time. For the first time, it's always enjoyable, it's thrilling, like you got this adrenaline rush and everything. But once you do it again and again every day, it's not fun for you, it's not fun for your family, especially your family, because your family are always in a worry. So that was also one of the reasons that, sharing my own personal story, after the 1972 avalanche, where my grandfather lost many of his friends and even his brother, that was when my grandma, she um, told my grandfathers to stop, like stop going to that mountain. Like it's fine, we'll figure something out, but mountaineering, it's like going to a war zone, because the family will always be in this fear of what will happen. So my grandma didn't want that. And she also then said that from here on next, um, no member of my family will go climbing the mountains. So that's also the reason I haven't been a mountaineer. But at the same time, I do love the mountains. So I study them. I don't climb them, but I study them. So in a way, I'm close to the mountains in one way.
Tenzing, having born, as we said, at the feet of the mountains and in front of, and having them, I was thinking about this question a lot, having them in front of you to the extent that you need to look up to the sky versus having born to see a flat horizon. Do you think that the landscape in which we're born and raised influences our perspective in how we conceive life?
Of course, living in such a beautiful environment in the foothills of such grand mountains, it will have an influence on your life and the perspective on how you perceive life at the same time. Like when you talk about the mountains, there is this boldness, there is this strength that you get from it, there is this resilience that you understand from the mountains. But at the same time, like me coming from a climate perspective, regardless of how strong and how rigid these mountains are, they can be very fragile. They can be very unpredictable at the same time. So that's exactly life, right? You might have a strong foundation, you might have a strong build of everything, but at the same time, everything can go wrong at any time, or there could be any unpredictable events. So, in a way, I think I perceive that is what I learned from the mountains.
Sagarmatha, or Kumulungwang, her Tibetan name meaning goddess, mother of the world, recognized until 1852 as the highest peak on Earth's surface, named Everest after British surveyor George Everest, is 8,849 meters high, and as you were mentioning before, Tenzing, is a very dangerous place. Each step to the peak means a bigger chance to meet with death. Freezing temperatures, high altitude, and scarce oxygen are only a few stepstones to reach this mountain's tempting beauty. There is the cough from the breathing her fine cold air, a cough that can dry out the lining of the lungs and cause them to crack or at least break the ribs. Then there is frostbite and extreme heat, extreme enough to cause strong sunburn. And also, the zone that precedes the peak, it's called the death zone. And their oxygen there is so limited that the body cells start to die and judgment becomes impaired. Then there is all range of symptoms that go from extreme fatigue to dizziness and having heart attacks, severe altitude sickness, and the coughing of blood. From 1922 to date, there are at least 300 people that lost their lives in the attempt of reaching the top of this mountain, and most of whose bodies have remained buried under glaciers of snow. By knowing all of these risks, what does the Western man or woman is looking for in Everest?
Um, there is this sense of adventure that we talked about. There is this sense of thrill. There is this sense of adrenaline. Besides that, so I used to ask these questions myself as well. I asked the question to many people, and many people used to quote the same quote that I'm not sure who said that, but it might be George Mallory or somebody, that because it's there. To be honest, I don't I don't know what that means, but at the same time, there was this documentary I saw where there was a guy, there was a mountaineer who had no legs, like he was differently abled, but at the same time he was trying to climb, he was trying to summit the top of Everest. So there was this interview who asked him, "Why do you want to do that? What made you want to go to the top of the Everest?" And the answer that he gave was actually one of the best answers that I found. He said that because if I get to the top of Everest, the power that this gives to my life, the confidence that I get from this, like if I get to the top of Everest, then everything from here on I do in my life will be nothing compared to this. Because if there is any difficulty that comes to my life, if there is any challenges that comes to my life, what I can say is, I've climbed Everest. This is nothing for me. I can do this, right?
I don't know if I would agree with him because you see parents losing their children, you see really catastrophes going on, and then I don't think we are we're prepared to just plan and get over it with it.
That would be like one perspective. So I was getting to the other perspective. There is obviously the dark side of it. Like I said, I share a personal story from my grandfather and my grandmother as well, like how they've lost so much. What is the risk that includes? But it's very difficult because there is this employment opportunity that is tied with it. There is this sense of challenge with the Western world that we want to get up there, and it's still very difficult to like just scrap it all away because the allure of Everest, the charm of Everest will always be there because it's always there, right? Because it's the highest point. And at the same time, what I feel is like in case of a Sherpa, now at this point, we Sherpas now have the opportunity to pursue other options. Like for example, me, I have the opportunity to like study. I had the opportunity to study. I did, and I can come back to study the mountains, but I don't have to climb it. So if I want to climb the mountains, it should be from my own will. I should be more I should also enjoy it. I should want to go and then like try to enjoy the thrill and the adventure and the challenge. But it should not be something mandatory because we don't have any employment opportunities or we don't have any other options. So that is what I see for the next future of the Sherpas. And in case of the Western climbers and any climbers from outside Nepal, I think that's also what they should respect, and that is the perspective I think they should understand on the Sherpa side.
I like more your perspective. I have to say, I like more your perspective on that.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Texan, pathologist Dr. Beck Weathers, a survivor of the terrible tragedy of 1996 when 8 climbers caught in blizzard died on Mount Everest while attempting to descend from the summit. Because I think you have like 12 to 14 hours to go up and go down, right? Well, he said in an interview how after his surviving experience of being left in the mountains to die 3 times, that he realized how the mountain was really an allegory of his life absorbed by work, a challenge and an achievement, one after the other, to the extent that he did not live the present anymore, always waiting for the next peak to be conquered. After this experience, the people around him became his priority. Being close to death made him realize what is really important in life and not get caught in defining yourself by achievements. So I think he's right, and you don't need to climb a mountain to get inside this trip, in getting absorbed by work, as he said, without being present in the moment, and also valuing life on achievements instead of experiences. And there's a wonderful quote by him, by Beck Weathers, where he says, if you can't learn from dying, then you're definitely a slow learner. What does it takes to become aware, to stop missing the moment and start living the present moment? Now that you're living in Kathmandu, I'm making you this question.
I definitely agree with that. And like you said, we don't need these challenges every time to define us. We don't need these achievements to define us. But at the same time, it's something this society, this very competitive society that we have, this materialistic society that we have nowadays, because it demands that, and that's what we all thrive.
And imagine what a mystical experience and how strong the message was for him that he was left to die 3 times. So 3 times he had to learn this, to get this into his head. So that's why he says that if you don't learn from that, then you're a slow learner. And I think people living in the Western culture, as you said, that yes, we're slow learners, but we're getting there.
There was a saying from Reinhold Messner, who had climbed all the 14 peaks. He said that climbing all of these mountain peaks and all of these 14 peaks is not enjoyable at all. It's very difficult. It's very painful. And that's what he said, because of course it's painful. Of course it's very difficult. And I guess you don't need all of this achievement, but the journey in itself should be the lesson for you. And he said all of this pain and all of this will sort of help you to be more patient, help you to be more resilient. And I think that's what we should be like, not looking for achievement after achievement, because that's a gaping hole. That's like a black hole. It will never be fulfilled.
The Sherpas emigrated some 400 years ago from Tibet. In the Buddhist tradition, this journey is expected to be made inwards. And your grandfather, as an example, and so I read, is a religious man known to hold prayer, having beads and wheels always by his side, and who has been in many religious places in India and Nepal. It is a very different way of understanding one's place in the world. I would love to play a clip of a professor of religious studies, a wonderful writer, and most important, a very profound and wise man. His name is Rabbi Rami Shapiro, on our potential of becoming mystics.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's nothing we lack. We just keep blocking it. We're natural mystics. You look at your little kids and they're natural mystics. They have the astronaut's mentality without having to go into outer space. If we were brave enough to actualize it. I mean, it's like when Jesus says you have to be as little children, and the apostles say, well, we have to go back into our mother's womb. Well, not literally, but spiritually. Yeah, go back into the womb of the Divine Mother and see the world as it truly is, the way little babies see it, the way the astronauts see it, the way the mystics see it, as one expression of the divine whole.
So, we've been talking about tourism, and Nepal's economy relies on tourism, specifically constant flow of cash from climbers. So, tourism brings a lot of money to the Himalayas, and with money, as we've been saying, also changes, rapid changes. In your view, Tenzing, what would have been the most important changes experienced these last 10 years?
So based on the changes that tourism has brought to the Himalayan region, I can go on more 4 points. One is economy, culture, infrastructure, and environment. So talking about economy, of course, we've had a lot of economic boom. We've had a lot of employment opportunities. The standard of living of the people who have been impacted by flourished tourism has been quite commendable, because people have been able to increase their standard of life, increase their incomes. That is a plus point. Um, and at the same time, like I said before as well, the infrastructure. So wherever these tourism lines go, there is this development of infrastructure, there is this development of facilities, and that is a plus point. Of course, everyone can agree with that. But now we come back to the cons, right? There is this influence on the culture. Of course, there is this influence of Western culture, and me myself have been influenced by the culture from the West. And with regard to this, many of the Sherpa youngsters like me, like even younger than me, now they have been becoming more and more accustomed to the Western culture, that the Sherpa culture sounds foreign to them, right? And due to that, many of the not only Sherpa culture, the culture of the Himalayan region, there are a lot of ethnic groups in the region as well. Due to that, even my grandfather always reiterates this thing every time, that we have forgotten our roots. The Sherpa language might diminish in the coming years, because we've started to talk more and more in English, in Nepalese, but the mother tongue, like in case of me, the language, my mother tongue is Sherpa, we've started to use it less and less frequently. And in case of languages like Sherpa language, it's we don't have a scripture. So everything and every part of the language and the culture is from hearsay, passed down from generation to generations. And if it's not passed down to the next generation, then maybe in the next 10, 20 years, the Sherpa way of life, the Sherpa culture might not be there. So that is a danger, a looming danger that's up there. And I have felt that myself, and I've been more and more delving into my culture and going back to learning what it really means to be a Sherpa.
Well, that is extremely important, because once a professor of theology, Professor Bruno Schlegelberger, I interviewed him, and he was mentioning, and I mentioned that before in another podcast, that when languages are dead, cultures are dead, and with that, cosmovision is also lost, meaning that we lose the perspective of knowing where do we stand. And for all in cultures that, as you say, languages is passed and through orally, that there's no scriptures or writings.
And it is extremely essential that we learn our roots, we know our roots, and we try to, so like you said, this identity crisis, right? We try to be someone else, and we forget what we are, and we are somewhere in between. So, and that's the danger that we are in. And coming to the questions, the last part I'd like to highlight is the environment. because with exponential growth in tourism, these Himalayan regions, which were pristine, which were untouched beauty, now they have hundreds, thousands, and millions of people coming to these regions. And with it comes a lot of pollution. But at the same time, these are manageable things, right? If you have a proper policy, if you have a proper strategy, these can be managed. But if it's not sustainable enough, it can go worse very soon. And that's one of the things that's going on in Mount Everest itself. If you hear the news, you can hear about lots of trash, lots of dead bodies, lots of human waste just on the top of Everest, down on the glaciers. It's slowly trickling down. And it's a very difficult task because once it becomes irreversible, then it becomes very, very difficult for us to manage.
So we also need to say that the inevitable contact with the West also brought positive dispatch of schools and technology to be used in the advantage of the communities that, if well used, could mean benefits in the future of Nepal. Someone that knows the value of education is Kanchha, your grandfather, who had to face a lot of hardships throughout his life caused by illiteracy. I read, for example, that when he worked as a trekking guide, he had to keep accounts on trek with his beats and would always have someone make his notes. Probably, in some extent, the exchange caused by his friendship with Hillary made him understand the value of education. At any rate, he sent his 4 children to school in Kumyung so that they would have an easier life ahead. And we will hear now, I want to share that with you, Tenzing, one of our previous guests, former NASA astronaut Jose Hernandez, the son of Mexican migrant farm workers, who learned English at the age of 12. Jose spent his youth manually harvesting fruit and vegetables. He dreamed of becoming an astronaut, and he did. His story is an amazing story of resilience, discipline, and endurance. Let's hear him recount the story of the day where he told his father about his dream and what his father told him.
If you really want to do this, you need to follow a 5-ingredient recipe I'm going to give you. That if you follow it to the letter, I promise you as your father, you'll reach your dream. And I immediately became a sponge ready to absorb what he was going to say. I said, let me know what it is, Dad. What are the steps? He said, first, son, very easy. He said, first, determine your purpose in life. What is Jose going to accomplish in life? And I blurted out, I said, I want to be an astronaut. I figure I got 1 out of 5 done. I'm almost there. All right. Second, he said, recognize how far you are from your goal. I looked down on our kitchen floor, half peeling linoleum. We lived in a 2-bedroom dilapidated rental in the worst part of Stockton, California. And I told my dad, don't get mad, Dad, but I can't be any further than this. Yeah, I thought he was going to hit me. But he didn't. He chuckled. He said, well, I'm glad you recognize that, son, because the third thing you got to do is you got to draw yourself a roadmap, a map from where you know where you're at and given by your smart remarks you do to where you want to go, because you have to know the way to your destination. Draw yourself a map. I said, what's the fourth one, Dad? He said, it's education. You got to prepare yourself according to the challenge you selected. And you selected a big challenge, son. So you know you got to go to college and then some. I said, yeah, Dad. And then he said, fifth and final. He pointed outside the kitchen window and said, do you know the effort we put out picking fruits and vegetables Saturdays and Sundays and 7 days a week during the summer with your siblings, your mom, your dad, your father? You know that effort you put out, that work ethic? I said, yeah, Dad. He pointed to my books on the kitchen table. It says, you put that effort there in your books. And you also, when you graduate college, you put it in your job. And that's his parting words that evening, Cecilia, is what you just got through saying. He said, always give more than what people expect out of you.
Tenzing, you yourself became a scientist. And it looks like your grandfather opened, in a way, a new era for your family. What have been the most profound teachings you have gained from your relationship with him?
Regarding the story about the my grandfather with Edmund Hillary and Edmund Hillary developing and constructing the school in the Everest region. So my grandfather told me a story once on this matter. So Edmund Hillary was like he came to the Sherpas and he said, "What do you need? Like, what do you need?" And the people said, "We have eyes, but we can't see." So then he said, "What does that mean?" And I asked my grandfather, like, "What does that mean?" So you mean to say that we know how we have eyes, but we can't see because we need education. We don't have literacy. We don't know how to read and write. So build us a school here, build us something here, so that not only us, our future generations can then try to make something of themselves. Now that's where it hit my grandfather a lot, and that is why, even from my grandfather to my grandmother to my mother, everybody is always trying to say we need to study, because only when we are able to study, then can we go from this mountaineering curse. you know, it's not so bad, but like I said before, mountaineering should be an option. It shouldn't be mandatory for you, right? So that's where education comes in. That's the main goal of education, so that you can go outside, you can have this option of going outside. And that was one of the most profound stories, I guess, that my grandfather said on the value of education. And fortunately, I was very lucky that my grandmother and my grandfather got to see me graduate with my master's degree. I feel a very deep sense of pride that I was able to invite them and celebrate this achievement with them, because 20, 30 years ago, that was near impossible for them.
Oh, I can imagine how proud um, your grandfather must be and your grandma must be of you and
Yes.
his whole family. Like also your cousin helping him build this great foundation. This foundation, which name is Kanchha Sherpa Foundation, based in Kathmandu, sponsors children for education, especially the most vulnerable coming from poor and unprivileged communities. And it also aims for providing humanitarian aid. And by the way, there's a documentary directed by Morten Sangpo Borek named Kanchha Sherpa, which has won many awards and is very, very worth seeing in case somebody wants to watch it. It's very, very worth seeing.
Hi, we would love to hear your comments and learn about what you see. Share your input at www.ccpodcast.com and follow us on social media. Oh, I almost forgot. To accompany us in this season's journey, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And now let's continue with Ceci.
So, Tenzing, let's move now to talk about the greatest of all artists on earth. These magnificent giants of ice dressed by layers and layers of white snow, capable of beautiful creations. The Himalayas, Sierra Nevada, the Andes, the Alps, the Matterhorn, lakes and valleys are some of the wonders these giants have created through the planet existence. What attracted you to become a glaciologist, and why glaciers and glacial lakes?
So glaciology as a subject, when I was in my childhood, I never knew about it. I didn't even know about the existence of glaciers, but I enjoyed snow a lot. I used to enjoy myself being on the snow, and just my childhood was quite cherishable because of that. But it was only when I started to study my bachelor's in environmental science, where there was a class on glaciology. So I started to hear the lectures and started to study what this and what all of what glaciers and how they are formed. And then it sort of coincided with my what my grandfather used to say about how, like, there used to be a lot of snowfall and how the ice was there, how Everest Base Camp they used to go. So I used to hear all of the stories. And then the factual things on climate change, on how these glaciers are melting and how they will impact the lower downstream community, these all started to bind up to me. And then I thought, okay, this would be the best opportunity for me to study, right? I could go back to my home. I could make my home my work. I can come back to the community and give back to the community as well. So that is why I started to study glaciology. And I've been quite fortunate enough, and I've been very lucky enough to study the subject. Um, Regarding why glaciers and how glaciers sculpt the environment, so, like you said, glaciers are the sculptures of the world, and they act like barometers or more like thermometers because they are the best indicators of climate change. With When there is a warm in the climate, the glaciers start to retreat. When the climate starts to cool, they start to advance, and it is during these advancements of these glaciers where they started to sculpt the earth, right? So there, if you just imagine a glacier like a bulldozer. So what does a bulldozer do? It scrapes up all of the mud and all of the debris in front of it. So that's exactly what a glacier does when it cools. The climate cools, that is when it starts to advance, and that's where much of the landforms that we see now is formed by the advancing of these glaciers.
And I read Tenzing that they can move as slowly at 50 meters per year or as fast as 30 meters per year. Has that had changed?
Um, yeah, that's it depends on the reason. It depends on the glacier. It depends on a lot of things. But you are right. It can move from centimeters and it can up to meters. And in case of the Everest region, one of the fastest moving point is the Khumbu Icefall. That is where much of the Everest route goes. The Khumbu Icefall. Why is it so dangerous? Because it moves very fast.
Mm.
So that's also
It's a fast
one of the
mover.
reasons. It's a fast move. That is why you see crumbled up ice and you see ice moving all along. And it is this movement of ice that is the core definition of a glacier. So I'll just go a little bit more into definition of a glacier, right? When you talk about a glacier, it's just called a moving mass of snow and ice. So that's one thing that people sort of forget. Like, what is the difference between the ice that you get on a glacier and the ice that you find in your refrigerator? I want to ask the question to you. Do you know?
It's purity? I don't know. Is it?
Yeah, somewhat. But
I
anyways,
failed.
okay, the main difference is that the ice that you find in your refrigerator is just refrozen water, right? Water refrozen to ice. But in case of glaciers, the ice is made from snow. So people tend to forget that all of the ice that is in the glacier is from snow. When there is snow, slowly the snow starts to pile up, and then the weight increases, and then it starts to compress, and it starts to densify, and that's how it forms ice. And then slowly, once it starts to, this weight gets at a critical point, then it starts to move. And that is what we look for a glacier there, the movement of the ice and how much snowfall it receives. When you talk about glacier movement, we are now in a phase that much of the glaciers are retreating. There are only very certain glaciers, specifically in the Karakoram region, like that falls near in Pakistan, where we have seen advancing of glaciers, advancing of and surging of glaciers. We say, but in most of the regions, we have glacier retreat.
I remember reading about in 2014 a deposit for climbers then was introduced by the Nepalese government and how they collected 8 kilograms of trash at that time. How does that impact in this production of water at the feet of the mountains?
the fact I was talking about before was glacier advancement. It's the advancing of the glacier in itself. But what you're talking about right now is the movement of the glacier. So if there was garbage on top of the surface of the glacier, then of course the garbage would trickle down, and that, like you said, it's been a problem in the Everest region that there's a lot of solid waste. There's a lot of human waste that's trickling down from the top of the world, and that has had a lot of impacts on the water source, because that's exactly what the glaciers are very important for. They are the headwater of the world, so they provide water to more than 2 billion people downstream. So, in case of the Everest region, all of the waste that comes up there, and we did some research actually in 2019, and we found a lot of heavy metals in some of the water sources there. So that already shows that there's a lot of anthropogenic, there's a lot of human source pollution already impacting the water source in the region. And that's slowly trickling down from the glaciers towards.
Yeah, and what are we without water? I mean,
Of course, water is life.
water is life. We come from water.
But regarding water, we also must look at the fact that much of the rivers that come in the region, or much of the permanent rivers, large rivers, those are all balanced by glaciers. If you have seasonal rivers, right, they might dry up when there is no water or when there is no rainfall. But what is balanced on these permanent rivers that have a lot of water coming in, that's where the glaciers come in. In the drier seasons, it buffers and it provides meltwater. So that's very important. But at the same time, I guess it's the aesthetic value of the glaciers, and it's a way of life for many people. Besides that, there is now, with the changing climate, the glaciers are slowly thinning and then rapidly melting. So that has and will have a lot of effect, and will cause a lot of risk. And we can get to that in the later questions, I think.
Um, yeah, because nowadays there's a lot of nervousness about the velocity which the icebergs melt. And we see how people watch terrified how these big chunks of ice break and melt into the ocean, which at that point is a normal process of nature because that's how water is produced. But what is it so unnatural that is happening now and that is strongly worrying scientists and activists around the world?
So, like I said before, the core ingredient for glacier is snow, right? Snow feeds a glacier. But when we look at a glacier, we look at how healthy it is. So I'll just give you a very example of like ourselves, like us humans. How do we gain mass? We eat food, we take in calories. That's how we increase our mass. The more amount of calories we take in, the mass, our mass increases. The less amount of mass we take in, we start to lose mass, right? And that's the same thing for glaciers. You just substitute the amount of calories we take as snow, and you substitute the amount of calories we burn as glacier melt. So glaciers are in this very sensitive balance of how much snowfall it receives and how much glacier melt it experiences. So that's called the glacier mass balance. That's what we, as scientists, we always try to look for. So is the glacier in a positive mass balance, or is it in a negative mass balance? So in right now, in this scenario of this rapidly changing climate, what is going on is we have warming trends of temperature. We have temperature trends increasing, but at the same time, we have a lot of snowfall decreasing. So now we are in the worst case scenario for these glaciers. Like, we don't have enough snow to feed the glaciers, and we have at the same time a lot of temperature increasing, causing a lot of melt. So now we have this worst case scenario for the glaciers, and due to that, we have seen a lot of and a rapid retreat of glaciers, especially in these recent decades. And in case of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, that's where ICIMOD works on, and that's where Nepal Himalayas reside. So there was this recent global summit where they were trying to limit the warming trends to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But there was a recent report by ICIMOD we found out that there is a phenomenon here called elevation dependent warming. So what happens is that the higher up you go, the rate of warming actually increases. So you think that the higher up you go, it should be more colder, but it's actually the opposite. The higher up you go, the warming is more increasing. So that would mean that even if in the world the temperature trends are limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, this could mean much higher. And this could mean much higher, like it could mean like 2.5 degrees for the Himalayan region. And 2.5 degrees is very devastating for the glaciers. And that has been seen before. And if this continues to rise, then maybe half or more than half of all of the glaciers in this region could be lost by the 21st century, by the end of the 21st century.
Wow. And
And that's all bad news.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning how glaciers act as an indicators of climate change and global warming. So when you see that they have lost in mass and they are retreating, that is when you and there's less snow because of course they lose mass. Then that's when we are getting to start wearing, right?
Yes. I think why we study glaciers also comes to the fact on it's one of the most visible indicators of climate change. Like for example, you are sick, and how will a doctor diagnose you, or how will somebody identify that you are sick? Like you might be having a fever, you might have a runny nose, or you might be coughing. But the most visible symptoms of your being sick is that you're coughing and you have runny nose, because that's very visible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a fever, that might not be visible. Now, change this context into climate change. Like for in case of climate change, what is the most visible? Like glaciers. We have warming temperature trend, so the glaciers are receding. So that is one of the most visible evidences of climate change. Like in case of temperature trend, you cannot see that, right? It's unless you measure it, it's very difficult to understand uh, warming temperature trend. But that's where and why we study these glaciers.
Tenzing Glacier, which is the glacier that directly flows from Mount Everest and is the world's highest glacier with an elevation of 4,900 meters. You have also been there, and I would love to hear about this iconic glacier. Could you tell us about your fascination for it and what is going on there?
So I was there in the Khumbu Glacier in 2018. I was there with a team from UK, which was led by professors from Leeds University and Aberystwyth University. We are part of a project called the EverTrill Project. So what we went there to do was we drilled into the ice using a hot water drill to look at how cold the ice is. So we inserted temperature sensors inside the ice, and we left that for a year, and then came back to look at to download the data. But what we found was quite surprising, because the ice was what's warmer than we thought so. The ice was actually warmer than the average annual air temperature. Like just think about it, the ice is warmer than the air. We couldn't we were like quite surprised regarding that, right? And the sad part is, right, we most of the models and most of the mathematical models that we use to project like what will happen to these glaciers do not take into the fact how warm these ice are. So it means that we already predict a worst case scenario, a very bad scenario. But this means that it could get even worse. So this also means that this kind of warming ice is very, very um, dangerous as well, because it means that this ice inside is slowly warming up. And
And that
now
that
take
means
in mind,
it would melt, right?
yeah, so that's the key point there. Right?
And
We don't see any melt right now, but like melt only happens after you cross 0 degrees Celsius.
mhm.
The ice right now might be minus 3 degrees Celsius, but we give it a little bit heat. There's a lot of heat coming in. It slowly warms up to minus 2 degrees Celsius. It means that it's getting closer to zero. So what I mean to say is these glaciers are slowly coming to a tipping point. Now, once they cross this tipping point, that is 0 degrees Celsius, then we start to see this drastic melt going on in the glaciers. So that's when we start to see ice turning into water. That's where we see the water and the melt going
And
on.
then the water comes up.
And then not comes up, but it flows down.
It
flows
flows.
down
No,
in the form
I
of
mean,
rivers.
it goes up in the cities. I'm talking about here, my perspective from living in the city.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You're up in the
Of
mountains, but
course.
we're here, you're down.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it would reshape in coastlines and the lives of people living there. I think there's like 2.4 billion people that live within 10 kilometers of the coast.
Yeah. So, like, right now I'm talking about Khumbu Glacier, but why it matters for people, someone that lives in the coast, is because take in mind this is the highest point in the world. This is the most extreme environment in the world. But still, we see warm ice here. Still, we see this kind of melting going on here. Like in just 6 decades, like a recent study found that there was nearly 100 meters of thinning in the glaciers surrounding Mount Everest. That means these glaciers are facing a lot of rapid recession. And what does this mean for the glaciers and all of the snow and ice that is outside from this region? What does it mean for Antarctica? What does it mean for all of the region? Means that if the highest point in the world in itself is already facing the impacts of climate change, then it already means that the other parts are already much worse case. So, and then we know that after all of these ice start to melt out, the sea level lines will increase, the coastal areas will be in a much more risk to overflooding.
And as you
And
said,
we might have,
flooding, exactly.
sure,
That
sure,
was
sure.
what I was meaning of going up
Yeah,
the
yeah.
flooding. And, also what you say, to revert that is almost impossible at the end, right? Because I think the whiteness of the snow, it's also meant to reflect the solar radiation, and that keeps the earth cool. So, but then how do you break that cycle? That's what you meant, right? That it's so difficult to revert what's happening if we get into a bad place.
Yeah, it's just to add more bad news, like it's we can't do anything about it in case of glacier, right? Glaciers are just the symptoms. Unless we tackle the disease itself, just tackling the symptoms will not solve the disease, right? So, in case of glaciers, we can't do anything, but what we can do is try to minimize the risk to ourselves, minimize the damage to ourselves, try to be more resilient, try to build more adaptation measures. So that's what we're trying to do here. That's what we're trying to. So in case of, I'll just talk more about the Everest region and like the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. So like I said, once the glaciers start to melt, there'll be a lot of increase in the melt, right? So what happens to all of the melt that comes down? So there will be a lot of increase in the discharge. So there are two phases that will happen. One is too much water. The other is too little water. And the worst thing is we'll have too much water when we don't need it, and we'll have too little water when we actually need it. And what happens when we have too much water? Of course, there'll be flooding. But at the same time, in case of these higher mountain regions, what has been happening and has happened as well is all of this water will start to accumulate in the form of glacial lakes. And these glacial lake will start to outburst. And they have caused a lot of devastating damages in the Everest region and in many parts of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. In case of now going back to what the local people feel and what the local people perceive, in case of the Sherpa people, we also feel that lakes also have a very spiritual connection with us. We feel they are goddesses and God that reside in this region. And some elder people even have a feeling that these lakes outbursting, these avalanches happening, are the gods getting angry at us. Because there's so much commercialization going on. Humanity's greed is actually getting worse and worse, that the earth is responding back. In a way, it might be actually true, but there's no causal relationship, but it's actually happening. We are now facing the impacts of climate change. It's not that what or when or if, it's actually happening. The first phase of climate change is already happening. The cause of climate change might be global, right? It's a global impact, but the impact that we have is even more amplified at these local regions, especially in the Everest region and in Bangladesh. Like many of these local regions, we have these amplified. We can't do anything about it because we are not the cause of it. Like if you ask somebody in like the Everest region to stop burning yak dung or stop burning firewood, that doesn't do much difference because there are one of the two major polluters just beside us, China and India. So we can't do anything about it. But what we can do is try to minimize the risk we have, minimize the exposure to this risk. So that's what we are trying to do, and that's what we are aiming to do.
And Tenzing, so maybe that has to do with this other study you were part of with UNDP that generated a list of potentially dangerous glacial lakes in Nepal. Why are these glacial lakes so dangerous? And could you also give us a brief overview on your recent expedition to Lower Barun Glacial Lake?
So, like I said, once the glaciers start to melt, all of the meltwater will start to then accumulate and form glacial lakes. These glacial lakes can then outburst, form glacial lake outburst floods. Now, in case of the Nepal Himalayas, like recently I was part of a report where we looked at identifying potentially dangerous glacial lakes. So now I work as a remote sensing and geoinformation associate. So now I have the tools with me. We have satellite images. We have these high resolution elevation models. So what we can do is look at these lakes from above the space and look at how they are changing, what happened in the past, and what's going on at the moment. So from this, then we looked at all of the like three major basins in the Nepal Himalayas, and we found at least 47 of these lakes were potentially hazardous. Like they could outburst and cause a lot of damages to the downstream population. Now, coming to that, so once we release the report, so what this gives more information is once we have this list of potentially dangerous glacial lakes, then we can then look at which of these glacial lakes are more hazardous and which of these glacial lakes need more further investigations. And that's what we actually did in Lower Burn Glacial Lake. I went there in 2021 with a team from ICIMOD. We went to the lake and we looked at how deep the lake is. So it's called a bathymetry survey. What we do mostly is looking at what's going around the lake, what's going inside the lake, and what's going just above the lake. So we take all of that information, come back, and then try to look at a more deeper way what we looked at from the space and what we went and validated in the field correlates with each other.
We were talking before about how Sherpa communities consider lakes and mountains as gods and goddesses. They have deep respect and have a spiritual connection with their environment. So, how do you gain Sherpa communities' trust to conduct your research and communicate how the use of technology, if ethically and properly used, can safeguard nature and protect Sherpa settlements in case of catastrophe?
Now, in case of lakes, what you said is very correct. And we have this deep respect for lakes like we have for mountains. Now, I'll take you back to a story on a glacial lake outburst flood that happened in the Everest region. That was called the Dikcho Glacial Lake Outburst Floods that happened in 1985. That glacial lake outburst flood wiped out a newly constructed hydropower that was made for Namche village. And everybody was quite shocked, like, what happened? Like, how could that be? And nobody knew there was a glacial lake that outburst. And what we need to understand is that it's fine because at the same time, once we go into these higher elevations, we see lakes more pristine, more untouched. And that is exactly due to this belief that once we go higher up, these lakes have not been touched. These lakes are more pristine and they are pure as it should be. And that's what the Sherpa people believe in, that it should be untouched, undisturbed, and that's what the gods want. And in a scientific way, that's actually what we're looking for, right? But sometimes, in case of Lower Borean Lake, we need to go and, like, in case of these potentially dangerous glacial lakes, we need to know what's happening, what's going inside, what's going around the lake. For that, we need to go on the lake and try to do surveys. But people don't like that because it might mean that we're disturbing the sanctity of the place. We're disturbing the goddesses that or the deity that resides there. So always to convince the people, you always have to have this deep respect for the culture. Me being from a Sherpa community, I understand what the belief is and what is the point of the people there. So we always find the consensus there. In case of what they did in Everest, when they didn't want to go to the top, but they also wanted to have employment opportunities, and they started to look for a middle ground. That was the puja that they did, right?
For the ceremonies,
like
right?
puja ceremony.
The ceremony that you were mentioning at the beginning, where you get permission of the goddess to go up.
Exactly. So that's what we did in case of the lake as well. Because if our intentions is right, if what we want to do is to protect the lake, what we want to do is protect the people, then that's what we do. Like, we do the puja ceremony, we ask permissions from the lake. So in that way, we include the local people themselves. We respect their culture. We try to show that what we intend to do and what the God intends is it's synonymous with each other, right? So that is how we sort of got into an agreement. And in case of the Everest region, that Sagarmatha National Park is one of the most successful national parks in the whole of Nepal. One of the reasons why is because the people there are primarily Buddhist. So there is already a deep-rooted sense of in the people that we shouldn't cut down trees, we shouldn't poach animals, we should look to a more sustainable way, we should look to a more conservative way. So there is already this conservation rooted into the people. And what the national park wanted and what the people wanted is synonymous with each other, right? So it sort of then becomes like a symbiotic relationship. In a symbiotic relationship, there is a win-win scenario for both. Both sides of the party take some sort of advantage. So that's what exactly the national park did, and that's how they got into a very good agreement with the people, and it's still one of the most successful national parks in Nepal.
Tenzing, to finish our interview, I want to ask you if you would be so kind and describing a little bit about this ceremony that you do to be able to go up.
I am not a monk, so I cannot describe on the main nitty-gritty of it, but I can just provide you with a gist of it. So before going to or before trying to do any summit or any expedition, what most Sherpa people do is do a puja ceremony. That's where we offer liquor, we burn incense, and we burn juniper. That is to please the god. That is to ask the god for your permission that we are coming on your lands, we are stepping on your lands, and we hope that we do not invoke the wrath, or we do not invoke your anger. And what we intend to do is not harm, but we just want to pass by. So I think that is the general intention of what the puja ceremony is. And at the same time, it is also to sort of like bring this blend between the fear that the people have, right? These kind of puja ceremonies actually help you get more so that's where it helps. It reassures you, right? It reassures you that everything will be fine, because either you believe in science or not, you always have this deep sense of hope that there is some almighty, that or there is a luck, or there is a fortune, or there is a fate that will sort of help you in these kind of unprecedented events. And it reassures even the Westerners, even the Sherpas. So that's the actual nature of the puja. But I also think that that's also where the bonding starts. That's also where the bonding between Sherpas and the climbers, mountaineers, right? That is why in most of the ceremonies in the Sherpa people, there is always white or yellow. Even the ceremonial khadas that we wear, It's called khadas. It's sort of like a scarf. It's always white and yellow. And that was what was meant pure. And maybe in the olden times, there wasn't cold drinks or there wasn't any other thing. Only thing white was the alcohol, the rice wine there. So that's why they started using that. So, but in a way, the Western people get more accustomed and more indulged into the Sherpa culture. And at the same time, the Sherpa culture also get to understand and get to respect the God and that they believe in. So this is a win-win scenario for all because it doesn't harm anyone, right? It doesn't harm anyone, and it appeases everyone. It sort of is like an icebreaker reception, I think. even before you have any meeting or even in conferences, there's an icebreaker reception. It sort of is an icebreaker as well. So
Tenzing, you were mentioning also that dead bodies are increasingly being exposed and discovered by climbers. This not only shows the strong impact of climate change and global warming, but it surely sends a strong message. Thank you very much, Tenzing, for granting us this interview and allowing us to move virtually through the Himalayas and a conscious perspective about where climate change and global warming are moving towards.
thank you very much, Cecilia, for having me. It has been wonderful getting to be part of this podcast, and I hope what I said was useful. Yeah.
Thank you to you, and thank you to our listeners wherever you are for having allowed us to share time with you. Please do not forget to check this episode's description to inform yourself about Tenzing Chogyal Sherpa's work and research regarding glaciers and also his grandfather's foundation, Kanchha Sherpa's Foundation. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.